I killed Marshal Price. The confession echoes inside a burning church as gunsmoke swirls and townsfolk hold their breath. This is not just a legend. It's the real feeling story of Elias Boone, the runaway cowboy who spent a decade outrunning a lie, until he rode back at dawn to face it. True Wild West Stories invites you to witness how redemption can rise from the dust, and how one man's courage changed a town forever. The sun sagged low over the Wyoming prairie, smearing the sky with copper and rose. Long shadows stretched across the brittle grass, and the wind carried a taste of red dust. Elias Boone rode at the head of a slow-moving herd, his hat brim pulled low, his coat faded by sun and years. The bells on a few steers clanked softly, the only music in that vast, empty field. From a distance the glow of Rockvale flickered, lamplight and neon promising warmth, but not necessarily welcome. Each thud of a hoof on dry earth drummed up memories he tried to bury. In the shiver of grass and the hiss of wind, he sometimes thought he heard the bark of lawmen's dogs, or the crack of a pistol behind his back. He shifted in the saddle and forced his gaze forward. That was years ago, he told himself. Here he was, no outlaw, only another cattleman moving beef through a dusty county. Yet his hands stayed tense on the reins, as if the past might gallop up behind him at any moment. The herd spilled into the stockyard on the edge of town. Elias swung down from his horse, tied it to a post, and walked across the street. Rockvale was small but restless, a knot of clapboard buildings, a feed store, a church steeple, a neon sign for cold beer humming against the dusk. A few townsfolk stood under awnings, watching him the way people watch a thundercloud forming. He felt their eyes slide off his back, heard their mutters drift through the breeze. They didn't know who he was, at least not yet, but they sensed something about him that didn't belong. He pushed through the swinging doors of the saloon. Inside smelled of spilled whiskey and fried onions. A ceiling fan ticked lazily, stirring the haze of cigarette smoke. Men in dusty boots crowded tables, swapping stories, slapping cards down. The laughter was rough but familiar, like wind scraping rock. A waitress in a gingham dress carried mugs of beer, foam sloshing over her fingers. Somewhere in the back, a banjo played a ragged tune, its notes trying to cut through the noise. Elias walked to the bar and asked for water. The barkeep, a heavy-set man with a handlebar mustache, slid him a glass without a word. Around him, conversations faltered for a heartbeat. A rancher in a sweat-stained hat whispered to another. Someone spat tobacco juice into a can. Elias drank, eyes fixed on the wood grain of the counter. He had learned to let stares roll off him, like rain off oilskin. In the corner, a man he hadn't noticed before leaned back in his chair, boots propped on another. Younger than the rest, lean and sharp as barbed wire, he watched Elias with a hunter's stillness. Cole Travers had the look of someone who measured men by the price on their heads. He tapped his fingers against a folded sheet of paper and said nothing. Elias finished his drink and placed a coin on the counter. He could feel the room's weight on his shoulders, the smell of beer, the scrape of boots, the murmur of questions unsaid. He tugged his hat lower and stepped toward the door, moving with the same deliberate calm he used on skittish cattle. Outside, the evening air was cooler, tinged with sage. He swung into the saddle, his herd penned for the night, the town lights brightening as darkness crept in. Behind him, through the saloon's window, Cole Travers straightened. He dropped his boots to the floor and rose with slow purpose, the paper still in his hand. His eyes followed Elias through the glass, cold and sharp as a drawn blade. Morning broke pale and cool over Rockvale. The prairie winds had quieted, leaving the town square hushed except for the flap of a flag high on its pole. Elias Boone led his horse across the cobblestones, boots scuffing. He hoped for a quiet errand before the herd work began again, but the square was already busy. Women carrying bread from the bakery, a wagon creaking under bales of hay, old men smoking on a bench. Faces turned toward him the way iron turns to a magnet. Cole Travers stepped out from under the shade of the feed store porch, boots clicking. He looked fresher than he had the night before, his shirt tucked in, a clean bandana at his throat. In his hand was a folded piece of paper browned with age. "Mornin', Boone," he said, his voice pitched so the gathering crowd could hear. "You and I have unfinished business." Elias stopped in the middle of the square. The memory of the saloon's smoke and whispers flickered through his mind. He adjusted the reins in his hand, but said nothing. The townspeople drifted closer, curious as crows. A farmer with dirt under his nails muttered to his wife. 2 teenagers climbed the courthouse steps for a better view. Cole unfolded the paper with a slow, theatrical snap. The creases held years of dust and sweat. He held it up so the sun caught the faint image. A younger Elias, jaw clenched, eyes dark. A price printed underneath. $10,000, Cole announced. Dead or alive. Elias Boone, wanted for the murder of Marshal Wyatt Price. A ripple passed through the crowd like wind through wheat. Someone gasped. Someone else spat into the dirt. "He's a killer?" a woman whispered. "No wonder he keeps to himself," another said. A few men shifted their weight as though measuring the distance between them and the reward. Elias's jaw tightened. The photograph was a ghost from another life, one he'd spent years outrunning. His hands curled into fists at his sides, the leather of his gloves creaking. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, waiting for an explanation, waiting for guilt to show in his face. He stared at the poster, but refused to look at Cole. Cole took a step closer. "Thought you could bury it, didn't you?" His tone was half mock, half satisfaction. "But dust doesn't hide blood. Folks here have a right to know who's among 'em." The square felt like a courtroom without walls. The flag above snapped in the breeze like a judge's gavel. Reverend Bell stood at the edge of the crowd, lips pressed tight. Hank Porter's hand hovered near the butt of his revolver but didn't draw. The tension smelled of iron and horse sweat. Elias lifted his head slowly. His eyes swept over the faces, fearful, greedy, uncertain. He did not speak. Words would only tangle in rumors. Instead, he straightened his back and breathed, fighting the old instinct to run. The gloves creaked again as his fists clenched. Somewhere a dog barked and went silent. The silence stretched until it ached. Then from across the square a woman stepped forward. Maggie Whitfield, the cafe owner, her apron dusted with flour. She didn't say a word. She simply stared at Elias, her gaze caught between doubt and something softer, something like gratitude. The sun glinted off her hair as the wind tugged at her skirt. The crowd murmured, shifting like restless cattle. Cole still held the poster high, but his eyes flicked from Elias to Maggie, sensing an undercurrent he couldn't read. The flag snapped again overhead. In that instant, Rockvale felt less like a town and more like a jury, and Elias Boone stood in the dock without a defense. Maggie's eyes stayed on him, a question and a promise in the same look. A few weeks had passed since the wanted poster was unfurled like a sentence in the town square. But the memory of it clung to Elias Boone like burrs on a saddle blanket. He kept to the ranch now, speaking little, working from dawn till the prairie turned violet in the evening. The cattle didn't ask questions. The wind didn't judge. Still, the silence wasn't peace. It was a trap door into the past. The wooden slats of the barn groaned in the wind. Elias stood with his arm braced against a stall post, the scent of dry hay and manure thick in the air. Outside, a steer bellowed, deep, mournful, the kind of sound that came from a place below words. He leaned into the post, eyes closed. The past always found a way back in. It began with a card game. That night came sharp into focus now, as if memory had sanded it clean. Marshal Wyatt Price had a laugh like rolling thunder, and a temper to match. They'd sat around a worked table in a saloon down in Red Rock, a bottle of rye between them and 3 men playing more than cards. Elias remembered the weight of the air before it broke, the unspoken grudge, the flicker in Clint Harrow's eye. He remembered the snap of the ace of hearts hitting the table, the way Clint's boot nudged something under the cloth. Then the sound, a gunshot as sharp as a snapped branch. Wyatt Price fell, chair toppling, blood seeping into the floorboards faster than anyone could move. Clint's voice rose in false alarm. "Boone! What the hell did you do?" He hadn't touched a gun, but the sheriff only needed a man to blame, and Clint was faster with words than with bullets. The rest was chaos. Shackles, shouting, a cell that stank of piss and regret. By the time Elias escaped into the night, he was branded a murderer. The law never looked back. Neither did Clint, except to collect the bounty. Elias kicked at a piece of straw on the floor, jaw clenched tight. He'd run far and fast, changed names, slept with one eye open. But none of it wiped away the truth. He was innocent, and Clint Harrow had walked away clean. Now, Rockvale was the first place in years where Elias had dared to plant roots, and already the past had tracked him down. A gust of wind slipped through the cracks in the barn wall. The boards rattled, and the rafters sighed like tired lungs. He ran a hand through his hair, damp with sweat, and moved to latch the gate on the calf pen. His fingers trembled. Rage or memory, he couldn't tell. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't cattle, not the creak of the barn. A soft crunch, deliberate, just beyond the far wall. He froze. The wind stilled. Another sound, a footstep on gravel or a hand brushing hay. Elias reached slowly toward the pitchfork leaning near the door. His heartbeat was a drumbeat in his ears. Someone, or something, was out there. The night was thick as tar, and the wind had gone still. Too still. Elias Boone stood by the barn door, the pitchfork still clutched in one hand. His eyes narrowed toward the faint rustling beyond the corral fence. A moment later, a sudden flare split the darkness, an oil torch igniting with a whoosh. Then another, and another. One by one, torches came to life like eyes in the dark, surrounding the barn in a circle of flickering gold. Shadows danced on the dry grass and across the weathered boards of the cattle pens. The orange light painted twisted expressions onto the faces of the men holding them. "Come on out, Boone," a voice rang, clear, firm, unmistakably Cole Travers. "Let's end this like men." Elias didn't move. His breath was shallow, heart pounding like a mallet on rawhide. The sight before him was a bitter echo of days gone by, of bounty hunters in the mountains of Nevada, of dogs barking through snowy pines, of his lungs screaming as he ran. This time he wasn't going to run. Not yet. He pushed the barn door open just enough to peer outside. 6 men, maybe 7, stood in a semicircle. Most had rifles slung over their shoulders or pistols gripped in white knuckles. Behind them the cattle shifted nervously in their pens, lowing deep and uncertain. The air reeked of sweat, smoke, and something hotter, fear. Cole stepped forward, gun drawn, eyes fixed. "You didn't think we'd let a killer nest here, did you? The law may be slow, but folks around here ain't blind." Elias stepped into the light, hands at his sides. "You don't want to do this," he said, voice gravel low and steady. "You don't know the whole story." "We know enough," said one of the men, Jed Crowley, the blacksmith, his apron still streaked with soot. "We got a wanted poster. Says you killed a marshal." "That's a lie, and some of you know it." Elias looked from face to face, catching a flicker of uncertainty in more than one. "But this ain't justice. This is a damn lynching." Cole's jaw clenched. "Then tell it to a judge, after we bring you in." He raised his revolver, finger tightening on the trigger. But his eyes hesitated, just a second, maybe less. Elias saw it, that flicker of doubt. It was enough. With a sudden motion, Elias dove sideways behind a stack of hay bales as a shot cracked through the night. Splinters of wood exploded behind him. Another shot rang out, then another. Men shouted. Horses reared in panic. Elias rolled, drew his own revolver, and fired once, high, not to kill, but to scatter. The bullet tore through the top rail of the fence, snapping it like dry bone. A lantern was knocked over in the chaos, flames licking at the hay. Smoke began to curl upward, thick and bitter. He sprinted to the cattle gate, flung it open, and slapped the flank of the nearest steer with the flat of his hand. "Go!" he shouted. The herd exploded. Hooves thundered as panicked cows shoved through the opening, trampling past the torchbearers. Men yelled and scrambled, trying to get out of the way as the stampede swallowed the space between them. Smoke turned to black columns. A beam cracked overhead. Firelight caught the edge of Elias's boot as he vaulted the fence. He didn't look back. With a quick whistle, he swung up onto his horse and steered it alongside the stampeding herd into the open prairie. Behind him, the ranch was a blaze of chaos, snorting beasts, flickering torchlight, screams, and the unmistakable scent of burning timber. Elias Boone disappeared into the night, swallowed by dust and fire. The dawn came pale and slow, casting long shadows over the prairie. Dust clung to Elias Boone's coat, his boots cracked with dried mud, but he rode steady, eyes fixed on the little rise just beyond the creek bed where the old red brick church stood. Its bell tower had long since fallen silent, and ivy had clawed up its side like time reclaiming what man forgot. Still, the place had a kind of stillness that the rest of the world had lost. Elias dismounted and tied his horse loosely to a broken hitching post. The wind carried the faintest scent of wax and old wood. He stepped inside, boots echoing softly on warped floorboards. Candles flickered on the altar, their tiny flames fighting the draft that slipped through the cracks in the stained glass windows. Dust floated in shafts of light, like spirits unburied. "Reverend Bell?" Elias called, voice hushed by the weight of the place. From behind the pulpit, a figure emerged, thin, stooped, but eyes sharp as ever. Reverend Josiah Bell had aged like whiskey, dark, potent, and full of stories. He wore a threadbare vestment and held a brass crucifix in one hand, his knuckles swollen with time. "Elias Boone," Bell said slowly, his tone somewhere between welcome and warning. "The last time I saw you, you were a boy with fire in your gut and smoke at your heels." "I'm still carrying the smoke," Elias replied, removing his hat. Bell nodded toward the pews. "Sit. The Lord's house may be broken, but it still listens." They sat in the silence. The distant chirp of a sparrow filtered in through a shattered window. Elias stared at the floor, rough hands resting on his knees. "I didn't kill Wyatt Price," he said finally. "I was set up. Clint Harrow. He made it look like I pulled the trigger." Bell didn't flinch. "I remember Clint. Smiled like a preacher, lied like a poker dealer, wasn't worth the whiskey in his glass. And you, always too honest to bluff your way out of trouble." "I ran," Elias said, "and now they're hunting me like a damn outlaw." The Reverend leaned forward, candlelight dancing in his tired eyes. "You remember what I told you, boy. Long ago, before you left Rockvale the first time? Don't run. Face it," Elias said, voice low. Bell pointed a crooked finger toward the altar. "Truth ain't always a safe road, but it's the only one that don't circle back to haunt you. You want peace? It won't come from hiding. It'll come from dragging the devil into daylight." Elias swallowed hard. His chest felt tight, not from fear, but from clarity. Bell stood, walked slowly toward the altar, and struck a single note on the old church organ. It groaned but held. Then, almost reverently, he hummed a hymn, faint, familiar, like a lullaby from a dying world. "Clint Harrow's still out there," Bell said, "and men like him count on the rest of us staying scared." Elias rose, taller now than when he entered. The light caught his eyes, clear, steady, no longer running. "I'll find him," he said simply. The hymn drifted through the broken rafters as Elias turned to leave, footsteps sure on the old wood. Outside, the sun had climbed just high enough to paint the church roof gold. The morning sun had barely crested over Rockvale's eastern hills when Elias Boone stepped off his saddle in front of Whitfield's diner. The building, squat and weathered, sat near the edge of Main Street, its windows glowing with the amber warmth of early coffee and frying cornmeal. The sign out front had lost half its paint, but the smell of butter and bacon was strong and honest. Elias wasn't here for breakfast. He stepped inside, removing his hat as the bell over the door gave a tired jingle. The place was near empty, save for the soft clatter of a spatula and the low hum of a gospel tune playing from a battered radio in the back. Maggie Whitfield stood behind the counter, her apron dusted in flour, a dark braid draped over one shoulder. She looked up, her hands pausing mid-motion over a plate of hotcakes. "You're leaving," she said plainly. Elias gave a slow nod. "Just stopping by to take some supplies for the road." She studied him for a second longer, then turned and walked to the kitchen without a word. At the far end of the room, a boy sat at a table, swinging his legs and nibbling on a piece of toast. He couldn't have been more than 6, eyes like his mother's, sharp, brown, watchful. Elias gave the kid a nod. "Morning." The boy smiled shyly, then looked past Elias. His face shifted to alarm. "Mama!" Before Elias could turn, a high-pitched whinny shrieked outside. A runaway horse barreled down the street, reins trailing like loose rope, eyes wide with panic. The boy had hopped down from his seat and was heading straight for the open doorway. "Miles!" Maggie screamed, dropping the plate and rushing forward. Elias moved without thinking. He lunged through the door, boots scraping against the wooden steps, and threw himself forward, catching the boy just as the horse's hooves pounded past. The wind from the animal's wake hit like a slap. The boy tumbled into Elias's arms, breathless but safe. Maggie ran to them, falling to her knees on the dusty street. She clutched Miles tight, her eyes glassy with fear. Elias stood, dusting off his coat, his chest still heaving. "He's all right," he muttered. She looked up at him, her voice tight. "Thank you." Inside, Maggie poured coffee with trembling hands. She set it on the counter in front of Elias, along with a plate of cornbread still steaming, butter pooling in its creases. "You're not what they say," she whispered. Elias looked at her but said nothing. She took a folded piece of yellowed paper from her apron pocket, worn at the edges. "A man came through town years ago," she said. "Said his name was Harrow. Paid in silver, talked smooth, and left behind this. I kept it. Didn't know why." He unfolded it slowly. Inside was a scribbled ledger entry, with names, dates, and a mark beside one. Marshall Wyatt Price. His hands gripped the paper tighter. "I don't know what it means," Maggie said, "but something tells me you might." Elias tucked the note into his coat. "Thank you," he said. Their eyes met, hers still searching, his beginning to soften. Outside, the town had returned to its morning rhythm. Somewhere, a church bell rang faintly in the distance. The canyon swallowed sound like a grave. Elias Boone crouched low, hand steady on the Colt at his hip, eyes locked on the narrow trail ahead. Rockvale's red cliffs rose jagged on both sides, casting long shadows beneath the cold light of a near full moon. The air smelled of dried dust and old ash, the silence broken only by the faint rustle of wind brushing the scrub brush. He moved slow, deliberate. The map Maggie had given him, marked with Clint Harrow's name and a list of suspicious payments, had led him here. According to Bell, Clint always favored places where a man could see who was coming miles away. A place to hide, but also to strike. And this canyon, it was perfect for both. Elias crept to the edge of a ridge that overlooked a low basin chiseled by time and wind. Down below, firelight flickered between boulders, casting long fingers across the rock. Shadows danced, men moved, voices low and indistinct. He counted 6, maybe 7. They sat around a fire pit, rifles slung over shoulders, whiskey passed hand to hand. There was laughter, rough and guttural. One man carved meat from a spit, grease hissing in the flames. Another sat apart, leaned back against a flat stone, legs crossed like a king holding court. Clint Harrow. Elias knew that posture even after all these years. One arm lazy across his chest, the other swirling a cup of something strong, a gold ring glinting in the firelight. His beard was thicker, his gut wider, but that smug, slanted grin hadn't aged a day. The bastard looked comfortable, rich, surrounded. Elias narrowed his eyes, heart thumping with a familiar blend of rage and regret. This was the man who'd framed him, who'd let Marshall Wyatt Price bleed out in a saloon while blaming it on someone too dumb or too honest to see the trap. He inched forward for a better look. A boot slipped. Not much, just a pebble dislodged under his heel, but enough. The sound was soft, but in a canyon like this, even a whisper bounced like a bullet. One of the men below froze mid-laugh. Another tilted his head, then stood, rifle in hand. Elias cursed under his breath and backed into the rock wall. His fingers gripped the revolver, pulse quickening. He had to move, fast, but just before he turned, the fire shifted, casting brighter light outward, and Clint looked up. Their eyes met. Even from a distance, Elias saw it, the recognition, the hatred. Clint didn't flinch, his jaw set, and slowly, deliberately, he stood up. The laughter died around him. The fire between them crackled like a warning, and in that silence, Elias knew. The hunter had just become the hunted. The blow came hard and fast, splitting Elias's lip before he even registered the first boot to his ribs. He was dragged through the dirt, wrists bound behind his back, the canyon walls echoing with the jeers of Clint Harrow's men. The firelight grew brighter as they hauled him deeper into the rocky hollow, past crates of ammunition, whiskey barrels, and horses tied loose. At the far end, nestled under a low stone overhang, sat the heart of the operation, Clint's lair. A deep cave flickering with firelight. Shadows writhed on the rock walls like ghosts. They threw Elias to the ground. Clint stood there waiting, hat tipped back, shirt unbuttoned, one boot propped up on a crate. A half-empty bottle of rye dangled from his hand. "Well, well," he drawled, stepping forward. "Ain't this just like old times, Boone?" Elias spat blood to the side. "You always needed men to do your dirty work, Harrow." Clint smirked. "Dirty or not, it gets done." The others laughed, their voices bouncing off stone. The room smelled of sweat, smoke, and spilled liquor. A rusted tin cup clanged against rock as someone stumbled into a crate, knocking over a bottle. The whiskey splashed across the dirt like a sacrifice. Clint circled Elias slowly, savoring every second. "I gotta admit, I didn't think you had the spine to come looking for me. Not after what happened to poor Marshal Price." Elias's jaw tightened. "You framed me." "I did," Clint said with a grin, "and it worked like a charm." He knelt beside Elias, holding out a playing card, the Queen of Spades. Worn edges, the same card from the night everything went to hell. "You remember this?" Clint whispered. "You had a pair of sevens. I had nothing. Just this one queen in my boot. You got mad. Marshall tried to break it up. Next thing we know, bang, one lawman dead, one sorry cowboy running for the hills." "You shot him," Elias growled. Clint's smile twisted. "You can screen that all you want, Boone. Doesn't change what folks saw. Doesn't change that you're the one been hiding ever since." Silence fell over the cave. The flames cracked behind them. Then Clint stood, raised his arms theatrically. "But look at us now. You came all this way, so let's make it mean something." He turned to his men. "Tomorrow morning, just as the sun hits the ridge, our dear friend Elias Boone gets a proper send-off." The crowd hooted. One man tossed a knife in the air, catching it by the blade. Another sloshed whiskey over Elias's boots. "Any last words tonight?" Clint asked, mock serious. Elias glared up at him. "Yeah, hell's got a seat saved for you, Harrow." Clint chuckled. "Well then, I'll see you there." They dragged Elias to a wooden post driven deep into the rock wall. Ropes wrapped tight around his chest and arms, the fibers biting into skin. His breath came ragged. Above him, a small opening in the rock ceiling let in a sliver of moonlight, cold and distant. The laughter faded as the men wandered back to their whiskey and fire, their shadows long and warped. Somewhere behind the flames, someone played a harmonica off-key, and Elias hung in silence, waiting for dawn. The moon hung low, casting a pale shimmer through the narrow slit in the rocky ceiling. Elias sat slumped against the wooden post, his arms tied tightly behind him. The coarse rope, digging into flesh, rubbed raw. Around him, the flickering fire had dimmed to embers. Shadows danced lazily on the cave walls, and the low drone of crickets filled the canyon with an eerie hum. Somewhere in the distance, wind whistled softly between stone ridges. The Reverend's words haunted his thoughts like a whisper in the dark. "Only the truth will save you, Elias." He exhaled slow and quiet, feeling each breath in his chest. He wasn't dead yet, and as long as he drew breath, he wasn't beaten. Not by Clint Harrow, not by fate. A bottle clinked nearby. One of the guards, a burly, red-bearded man, sat slumped against a crate, a whiskey jug in one hand, rifle leaning idly against his knee. His eyelids drooped, his chin bobbed with sleep's tug. Elias watched carefully, mind sharpening like a blade. "Hey," he rasped, his voice hoarse. The man stirred. "Huh?" Elias forced a weak chuckle. "You boys drink better than you shoot." The guard squinted, wobbled slightly. "I shoot just fine." "Didn't look like it earlier," Elias said, keeping his tone lazy, unthreatening. "Missed me by a mile." The man blinked. "I hit near your boot." "That was the dirt, friend." A pause. Then the guard gave a low grunt. "Damn rope's too tight for your mouth, I swear." He took another swig. Elias leaned forward slightly, making the rope creak. "If you're gonna kill me at dawn, least you can do is loosen the damn thing. My arms are dead weight." The man wobbled again. "Not my problem." "You ever been strung up like this?" Elias said. "After a while you start forgetting you have hands at all." The guard yawned, eyes heavy. He swayed where he sat, blinking slower. "Hell with it," the man muttered and staggered closer. Elias held his breath. The man crouched, fumbling for the knot, but his drunken fingers slipped, and after a moment he cursed and fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a small brass key. That was all Elias needed. In a blur he shifted weight, kicked up one boot, and sent the whiskey jug flying into the man's chest. It smashed with a loud crack, liquid and glass scattering. The guard reeled backward, dazed. Elias rolled to his side, reached behind awkwardly. His fingers closed around the key. Another moment, a twist. The lock clicked. Rope fell slack. Freedom. His arms screamed with numbness as blood rushed back into them. Elias gritted his teeth and shook them out, fingers tingling. He dropped low, crawling toward the dropped rifle before the guard could recover. The man groaned, tried to rise. Elias grabbed the rifle, flipped it in his grip, and brought the butt down with a sharp crack. Silence returned, thick and heavy. Elias paused, listening. No one stirred. The others were still asleep or too drunk to notice. He knelt by the dying firelight, eyes scanning the cave. He saw saddlebags, crates, the edge of Clint's gear stacked neatly against a wall. But he didn't linger. He found his old revolver, left carelessly in a corner, and checked the chamber. Loaded. 6 shots. Enough to make them think twice. The night wind moaned outside. Elias rose to his feet, stepped toward the cave's dark mouth. The gun felt cold in his grip. Somewhere out there, Clint Harrow still breathed. Not for long. Word spread like prairie wildfire. By sunrise, everyone in Rockvale had heard the rumor. Elias Boone had been caught and was now in the hands of Clint Harrow's men, somewhere deep in the canyons. Inside the town hall, an old timber-framed building with oil lanterns hanging crooked from beams and a draft whistling under the warped floorboards, voices buzzed like hornets in a kicked nest. The benches creaked under the weight of townsfolk, ranchers, barkeeps, shopkeepers, mothers clutching squirming toddlers. Someone passed around a tin of strong coffee, the steam curling upward into the rafters. Reverend Bell stood off to one side, arms crossed, eyes narrowed beneath bushy gray brows. Hank Porter, burly and red-faced, pounded a fist on the table. "The man's a murderer," he barked. "There's a bounty on his head, and Clint Harrow's doing us a favor getting rid of him." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "And what if Clint's the real villain here?" someone muttered near the back. "Bull," Hank growled. "Marshal Price is dead because of Elias. We all know it." Cole Travers sat quietly at the edge of the room, eyes hidden under the brim of his hat. He didn't speak. He hadn't spoken much since that night in the saloon when he'd followed Elias out into the dark. Bell stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Elias Boone came here, not to cause trouble, but to start over. That man worked hard, never asked for a thing, and kept to himself. I have seen worse men walk free." "He ran when accused," Hank snapped. "Only a guilty man does that. Or a man too tired to be hunted like a dog," Bell replied calmly. Someone dropped their coffee cup. It clattered on the wooden floor but didn't break. More voices joined in, some on Hank's side, some uncertain, a few defending Elias with quiet conviction. Tension clung to the walls like smoke from last night's hearth. "I say we vote," Hank declared. "Turn him in for the reward and be done with it." Cole shifted in his seat. "I say we wait," Bell countered. "Give the man a chance to speak for himself." "Speak? He's probably dead already." The room fell into uneasy silence. Then Maggie stood up. She hadn't planned to. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her spine straight. Her voice cut through the stillness. "He's not the man you think he is." All eyes turned. Maggie glanced at her son, who clutched her skirts. "That day, when Elias came into my diner, he didn't say much. Just ordered coffee and cornbread. Then my boy ran out front, right into the path of a runaway horse." She paused. "It was Elias who leapt without thinking. He pulled my son from the street. Could have been killed himself." Someone coughed. "I saw no cruelty in his eyes. No guilt. Only someone who's been carrying too much weight for too long." A long silence followed. Hank's jaw worked, chewing words he didn't speak. Cole's fingers tapped once on the bench, then stilled. The Reverend gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. Outside, the church bell struck once, a dull echo through cold morning air. The town hall had become a courtroom, no judge, no jury, but the verdict hung heavy in the air, waiting. And then someone asked, "What if Elias comes back?" Maggie answered softly, "Then maybe we finally listen." The cold breath of the cave clung to Elias Boone's skin like damp linen. He crouched in the shadows, the dying torch casting long, flickering shapes across the jagged stone wall. The stench of bat guano mixed with mildew filled the air, and above him, the faint rustle of wings stirred with every whisper of wind from the entrance. With steady fingers, Elias pulled the worn leather satchel he'd taken from the drunken guard just hours earlier. His knuckles were bruised, his face streaked with dirt, but his mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. The Reverend's words echoed in his skull. "Only truth can save you." From the satchel, He retrieved the crumpled contents, torn papers, a flask nearly empty of whiskey, a folded square of parchment stained with something dark. He unwrapped it carefully, holding it close to the flame. His breath caught. A map. Not just any map, but one that matched the layout of the old copper dust saloon in Deadwood. A red X was scrawled over a back room, and beneath it, initials, CH. He flipped it over. More scribbles, numbers, debts, names, amounts, and at the bottom, a signature he hadn't seen in over a decade. Clint Harrow. Elias exhaled slowly. His pulse thudded behind his ears. This wasn't just a memento. It was a ledger, a trail of dirty money, debts, bribes, and likely, blood. He scanned the list. One name stood out. W. Price, Marshall Wyatt Price. Next to it, a sum that made Elias sick to his stomach. So the marshal had been bought, or tried to be. But that wasn't all. Tucked in a hidden flap inside the satchel was a letter, folded so many times the edges had frayed. Elias opened it. The ink had bled, but he could still make out the scrawl. If the marshal won't play nice, make sure he folds. Permanently. We don't need another righteous badge interfering. Burn this after. It was unsigned, but Elias didn't need a name. Clint. The coward had ordered Price's death, then set Elias up as the fall guy. Elias's jaw clenched. His hands trembled, not with fear, but rage. 10 years lost. 10 years hunted, spat on, distrusted. And now, in this freezing hole in the earth, he held the key to clearing his name and burning Clint Harrow to the ground. A gust of wind swept through the tunnel. The torch flickered violently, shadows jerking and twitching on the stone like ghosts waking from slumber. Elias froze. Then, slowly, he heard it. Gravel shifting. Leather brushing rock. He turned. Behind him, on the wall of the cave, a new shadow stretched. Taller, broader, not his own. Someone was there. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He reached for his revolver, fingers wrapping around the worn grip, heart pounding against his ribs. But it was too late for surprise. The shadow moved again. A voice followed, low and amused. "Well, well," it drawled. "Digging through ghosts, Boone?" The torch flared one last time, then sputtered out. Darkness swallowed everything. The flame from Elias's torch sputtered back to life as Cole Travers stepped fully into view. Smoke curled lazily from the cigarette, clenched between his lips, its orange tip glowing dim in the murk. His revolver was drawn, but lowered, and his eyes, sharp beneath the brim of his hat, held none of the malice Elias had expected, just a cool, coiled wariness. "So," Cole said, voice dry, "this what you been hiding out here for?" Elias didn't move. "I didn't kill the marshal. I never said you did." Cole stepped closer, his boots crunching over loose gravel. But 10 years of silence doesn't scream innocent. Elias pulled the bundle of papers from his coat, unfolded the map, the ledger, and the letter. The torch crackled again, casting uneven light across Clint Harrow's incriminating handwriting. "Take a look," Elias said quietly. Cole took the papers, flicked the ash from his cigarette, and read. The cave was still, except for the faint rustle of wings overhead, and the steady sound of Cole's breath as he read through each line. His brow furrowed. A vein in his temple twitched. Marshal Price, he muttered. That's some by his name. Clint tried to buy him off. Elias nodded. And when Price didn't fold, Clint had him shot. Framed me. I ran because I was young, scared, and the whole town already decided I was guilty. Cole lit another cigarette off the first, exhaled slowly. The smoke drifted between them like a veil of doubt lifting. You know, Cole said almost to himself, my old man used to say every bounty hunter hits a moment where he has to decide if he's just chasing ghosts or justice. He reached into his coat. Elias tensed, but Cole didn't draw his gun. Instead, he pulled out the folded wanted poster, the one with Elias's face, weathered and sun-bleached from years in the saddlebag. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, without ceremony, he tore it clean down the middle. Elias blinked. You were right to run, Cole said, letting the pieces fall to the cave floor. But you were righter to come back. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. You believe me? Cole's mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. I believe Clint Harrow is a snake, and I don't like being lied to. I've been hunting the wrong man. He reached out a hand. Elias took it. It wasn't warm, it wasn't brotherly, but it was solid, and that counted for something. You sure about this? Elias asked. I ain't sure about much, Cole said, glancing back toward the cave entrance. But I'm sure we won't live long if we stay here. Clint won't take kindly to rats poking through his dirt. Together, they stepped out into the cold canyon wind. The stars overhead flickered behind drifting clouds, and the moon cast silver along the ridges. They didn't speak for a while, just walked, one step, then another, back toward Rockvale, back toward the fire. The summer air in Rockvale buzzed with fiddle tunes, laughter, and the smell of grilled meat and buttered cornbread. Colorful lanterns swung lazily overhead, strung from building to building across the town square. Tables were lined with steaming trays of baked beans, sweet rolls, and pitchers of spiced apple cider. Children darted between hay bales, faces sticky with molasses, while old-timers tapped their boots to the rhythm of a banjo trio stationed near the courthouse steps. It was the annual summer festival, a long-standing tradition meant to bring Rockvale together, shake off the dust of hardship, and remind folks they still knew how to smile. But beneath the cheerful glow, unease lingered like a shadow behind the lamplight. Near the pie contest table, Maggie wiped her hands on her apron, eyes scanning the crowd. Her smile was polite, practiced, but her fingers fidgeted around a folded piece of cloth tucked in her pocket. Elias's bandana, left behind days ago. She hadn't told anyone she'd seen him last, nor what he was planning. River and Bell stood at the cider barrel, murmuring pleasantries to townsfolk, but keeping his ears tuned to the shifting moods. He'd seen more silence than joy in recent weeks, and now this gathering felt like the calm before a thunderstorm. Near the bandstand, Hank Porter nursed a mug of beer, eyes narrowed. I don't like it, he muttered to a neighbor. Too quiet, even with all this noise. The neighbor chuckled nervously. Ain't that the point of a festival, Hank? Hank didn't laugh. He was watching the road, and for good reason. As the banjo picked up speed, the square suddenly jolted with a new rhythm, one that didn't belong to music. Hooves, fast, heavy, wrong. The first rider burst from the shadows at full gallop, rifle raised. Then another, and another. Clint Harrow led them, his coat flapping like wings, face twisted in a grin too wide for any festival. The music died mid-note. Screams followed as the gang fired into the air, shattering lanterns, knocking pies from tables. Bystanders dove behind barrels and benches. Ale spilled like blood across the dirt. The square, moments ago glowing with warmth, erupted into chaos. Clint's voice rang out, cruel and clear. "Where is he?" he barked. "Where's the coward you've all been hiding?" Hank drew his pistol, fired once, missed. The bullet ricocheted off the side of the bakery with a sharp ping. One of Clint's men shot back. The bullet grazed Hank's arm and sent him crashing into a crate of roasted corn. Reverend Bell grabbed a child and shoved him under the stage. Maggie, heart pounding, pulled her son into her arms and shielded him behind a cider barrel. The gunfire slowed, replaced by the sounds of people running, yelling, trying to escape the madness. Then, darkness. Someone, or something, had taken out the central lantern post. The square went black. Screams echoed through the night. A fiddle string snapped sharply. The town's heartbeat skipped. Somewhere, amid the panic, the sound of boots striking cobblestone grew louder. They were coming, and Elias Boone was not yet among them. The square blazed back to life in a harsh flood of lantern light. Someone, no one knew who, had pulled the emergency crank behind the town hall, reigniting every gas lamp around the square at once. The sudden brightness burned through the black smoke curling over the festival, revealing a landscape of toppled tables, shattered barrels, and frightened townsfolk crouching behind wagons and porch rails. Gunfire cracked again, sharper now. Elias Boone emerged from the haze like a ghost, rifle in hand, coat smeared with dirt and ash. His face was grim but focused, eyes sweeping left to right. Clint's men were scattered, their advantage of surprise fading fast. To Elias, this wasn't just a fight. This was reckoning. Near the bakery, Hank Porter was pinned behind a splintered rain barrel, blood darkening his sleeve. He looked up, just in time to see Elias dive toward a burning porch, where a girl, no older than 7, screamed from inside the smoke-cloaked doorway. Without pause, Elias dropped his rifle and rushed in. The crowd gasped. A beat passed. Then Elias reappeared, coughing, cradling the girl against his chest as the porch collapsed behind him. He stumbled clear, handed her off to a sobbing woman, and reached back for his rifle. Hank stared, stunned. From the general store's rooftop, Cold Travers knelt behind the chimney, cold steel glinting in both hands. He fired 3 shots in clean rhythm. Each one found its mark. Clint's men dropped like sacks of grain. The tide had turned. "Keep your heads down," Cole shouted, eyes never leaving the street. Clint, realizing his numbers were thinning, pushed through the panicked square toward the church. Elias spotted him just as he kicked open the chapel doors and ducked inside. The church bell above began to toll, wild, uneven, as if rung by a frantic hand. The sound clanged through Rockvale, shaking glass and bones alike. Elias sprinted after him, Cole trailing close behind. Reverend Bell had evacuated the last of the townsfolk. The pews were empty. Smoke crept beneath the stained glass windows, casting eerie flickers of red and gold. Then Elias stopped cold. Maggie. She stood near the altar, hands raised, eyes wide with terror. Clint held her tight, a pistol pressed to her temple, his face twisted in fury. "Drop it, Boone," Clint growled, "or I'll paint these walls red." Elias lowered his weapon, slowly, breath shallow. Maggie's eyes met his, pleading but calm. She trusted him, even now. Outside, the bell kept tolling. Inside, the town held its breath. The red brick chapel smelled of gunpowder and smoke. Cracks in the stained glass windows cast streaks of moonlight across the pews, slashing through the haze like pale blades. The bell above tolled again and again, a slow, heavy knell that rattled the rafters and echoed through the square outside. Elias Boone stood near the center aisle, gun at his side, eyes locked on Clint Harrow. Maggie was still in Clint's grasp, his pistol jammed against her temple. Her face was pale but steady, her breathing shallow. The Reverend stood a few feet behind the altar, frozen, while townsfolk pressed against the doorway, peering in with wide eyes, their whispers swallowed by the tolling bell. "Let her go, Clint," Elias said, his voice low but steady. "This ends tonight." Clint's laugh was jagged, desperate. "It sure does." He jerked Maggie closer, his hand trembling now. "All these years, Boone, you ran from a lie. My lie." The words echoed off the stone walls. "I told myself you'd die out there in the desert," Clint sneered, spittle flying. "But you kept crawling back like a ghost." "I killed Wyatt Price, not you. Me. He wouldn't take my money, so I put him down like a dog." Gasps rose from the doorway. Reverend Bell's lips moved, but no sound came. Maggie's eyes flickered with shock. "You hear me?" Clint shouted louder, his voice cracking. "I killed him. And I framed you because you were easy, because you didn't know how to cheat." Elias's grip on his revolver tightened. "Then tell it again," he said. "Tell them all." "I just did," Clint roared, eyes wild. "And it don't matter, because you're gonna die before the sun rises." He shoved Maggie forward, aiming at Elias. Elias moved, a flash of silver, the roar of two pistols. Gunfire cracked inside the chapel like thunder trapped in stone. The stained glass shattered above them, raining down shards that glittered in the moonlight. Maggie dropped to the floor and rolled behind a pew. Reverend Bell ducked. Townsfolk outside screamed. Clint fired twice more, missing wide. Elias dove to one knee, raised his revolver, and squeezed the trigger once. The shot struck true. Clint staggered back, his pistol clattering to the floor. He clutched his chest, eyes wide, mouth working soundlessly. Blood blossomed through his vest like a dark flower. "You," he rasped. Elias rose slowly, his revolver still aimed, but his hand steady. "It's over." Clint stumbled backward into the moonlight spilling through the broken window. For a heartbeat, he seemed to shrink, no longer a kingpin, just a man undone by his own greed. Then his knees gave out, and he crumpled at the foot of the altar. Silence swept through the church. The bell above rang once more, long, low, and final, then stopped. Maggie lifted her head from behind the pew, tears streaking her cheeks. The Reverend crossed himself, voice trembling as he whispered a prayer. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying away the last echoes of gunfire. Elias lowered his weapon, chest rising and falling. He looked down at Clint Harrow, lifeless on the chapel floor, and felt, not triumph, but release. A weight sliding off his shoulders after years of running. No one spoke. The truth had been spoken, blood had been spilled, and judgment had come with the toll of the bell. The first light of morning crept across the broken roofs and battered streets of Rockvale. Smoke still hung in the air, but it was thinner now, drifting lazily instead of choking the square. The echoes of gunfire were gone, replaced by the lowing of cattle on the ridge and the creak of wagon wheels being righted. The town was waking up, not just from sleep, but from something deeper. Elias Boone stood near the old water trough, dust still clinging to his boots, blood dried on his sleeve. His revolver was holstered now, hands empty. He stared out across the square where townsfolk moved carefully among the ruins of the night before, gathering chairs, sweeping glass, sharing quiet words. From the cafe door, Reverend Bell stepped out, his coat dark with soot, a Bible clutched in one hand. His voice, soft and cracked, rose in prayer. Not for vengeance, but for peace. For Marshall Price, long gone, but finally avenged. For the town. For the living. Hank Porter approached slowly, hat in hand, eyes downcast. He stopped just short of Elias. "I was wrong about you," he said, voice gruff. "I judged a man by the dust on his boots, not the fire in his heart." Elias met his gaze. "You weren't the only one." Hank gave a small nod and extended his hand. Elias took it. Across the square, Maggie stood on the cafe porch, apron still tied, a tray of cornbread and hot coffee in her arms. Her little boy tugged at her skirt, grinning. She walked to Elias without a word, handed him the coffee, and slipped her hand into his. It was small, that gesture, but it was everything. "Looks like folks finally see what I saw," she said softly. The square was full now, neighbors passing bread, children chasing each other around overturned barrels, smoke curling from fresh-lit cook fires, life returning. Someone had propped Clint Harrow's tattered wanted poster against the chapel doors. Beside it, the Reverend had written one word in chalk: closed. Elias took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. The sun was higher now, painting the ridge gold. A familiar sound drifted down from the hills, the low, steady call of cattle. "Your herd's waitin'," Maggie said with a faint smile. He smiled back. "Reckon they've waited long enough." Elias turned, hand still in hers, and together they walked through the square, past the chapel, past the scars of the night, toward the trail beyond. Behind them, the town buzzed with soft voices and morning light. Ahead, the prairie stretched wide, open, and waiting. At the edge of the rise, Elias paused and looked back one last time. Smoke curled gently from chimneys. Children laughed. Hank leaned against a fence post, watching the sunrise. A new day. Elias nodded to himself, his eyes calm, the burden of the past at last lifted. The wind stirred his coat, the sun touched his face, and for the first time in years, Elias Boone breathed without guilt. After the dust settles over Rockvale, the runaway cowboy, redemption rides at dawn, leaves us with more than just gun smoke and hoofbeats. It reminds us that running from the past only deepens its shadow, but facing the truth, no matter how dangerous, is the only road to real freedom. In a world where mistakes can brand a person forever, Elias Boone shows that redemption isn't handed out. It's earned, mile by mile, choice by choice. A man's past may chase him, as the old saying goes, but his courage decides if it catches him. What do you think? Can people truly change when they face their darkest truth? Drop your thoughts below. If this story moved you, hit that one in the comments, or tell us what state you're watching from. And if you want more gripping, true-feeling tales from the Old West, subscribe to True Wild West Stories so you never miss the next ride.